This is going to be a quick demo on blend modes, and what blend modes are all about are the way that your layers interact with each other. If you've already watched the layers demo, then you're ready to go ahead and take a look at blend modes. In fact, you probably already looked at blend modes before in other lessons, but if you haven't, this will be a quick intro for you, and it's something that we'll definitely be using on other tutorials on further on down the road. So while we're not going to get into every aspect of these, I want to give you a general intro to understand basically what they are and what they do. Okay, so first off, over here on your layers panel, well, before we even do that, go ahead and open up your blendmodes.psd file and take a brief look over here at your layers panel when you get a chance. You'll notice that you've got a little pop-up list of a lot of different blend modes. Okay, this is what we're talking about, and this is what I'm going to go over with you right now. Before I do that, let me just quickly show you the file. It's a little bit unorthodox, a little bit different than normal. We've got 3 different layers, you'll notice, and one of them is called color, the other one is called value. You notice that these are both chopped up into a lot of different sections. Let's first look at the color one. You'll notice that this one is just got a sliver portrait over here of me on the left, and then down the middle we've got a black to white gradient, and then 2 color gradients going down on the right side, one at heavy saturation levels, one at medium saturation levels. And then over here on the bottom, we've got value. We've got a black strip, middle gray strip, 50% gray to be exact, and then a white strip down here. And then we've got a black to white gradient showing you the gradual progression. And then we've got black and white photograph textures here in the back so that you can get a sense of what a black and white photograph, how that would interact with these other elements. Why the variety? Why all these different shifts and different gradients and things? Just so you get a sense of what blend modes are really doing at any given time. Blend modes are tricky to understand, and I don't fully comprehend all the nuances of them myself. But how most artists use blend modes is on a kind of a trial basis. What you want to do is you want to understand the categories of blend modes. You want to understand what they can give you. And then you want to go on a case-by-case basis usually and try them out. Because it's very hard to, imagine in your mind exactly what you're going to get with a blend mode, because there are at times very drastic and sometimes very confusing in the results. And sometimes you're scratching your head going, well, how did that happen? Or why did that turn black? Or why did that turn white? It's best not to try and, get too technical about these things. It's much faster and easier just to go ahead and try them out. And if they work great. Or if they don't, then you'll know right away if it's going to work for you or not. So nothing to be too worried about. All right, first off, let's start at the top. The normal blend mode is the way we're always working with layers, just as a normal case-by-case basis. We're working with layers as they normally appear with no further interaction, no strange combinations of value and color going on. So when we reduce the opacity slider over here, we're simply dissolving from one layer. Whoops, I did the opacity on the wrong layer. Let me put this back to 100. All right, I'm going to take the color layer down to 50% opacity. There we go. So when I do that on a normal blend mode, you can see I'm just dissolving from one layer to the next in a standard fashion. So it's gradually losing its opacity. Now, when I change that to dissolve, the other option in that category, when I do a opacity slide down, you notice it starts to gradually turn to sandpaper and starts to get very granular, very, very pixelated very quickly. And, for this reason, people don't usually choose that as a blend mode. They usually stick to normal. But the other categories are different. So starting with darken, going on down the line, these really have more to do with value and color interactions, okay? The first 3 dealing primarily with value, so let's go ahead and start with those. So darken, the darken section here that you can see between these 2 gray lines really are all about darkening the image, multiply being the most popular usually amongst people who use this category. What multiply does is it's similar to taking 2 slides into a slide projector at the same time and projecting them together as a group. So you're darkening them together, but you're taking all the value and kind of just, putting it over each other, and then therefore darkening what's already dark, and taking what's light and perhaps darkening that even further. But you can see here on my forehead where I've got a black to white gradient, the dark areas is taking my hair to complete black, whereas the light areas are having much less effect on the portrait below it. Whereas here we have you can see the textures of the rock, where the shadow areas were on the rock and the highlight areas is very clear, but you can see it's definitely having an overall darkening effect on the portrait behind it. If I just go to darken, you'll notice that it's very different effect. The main difference you're seeing there is that we're losing the pure blacks there on my face that are being affected by the value layer below it. And what we're seeing is more, instead of where the pure blacks are, we're seeing more of a complete washing out of the color and it being replaced by the gray pixels below it, the value pixels below it. Okay. And so when you start to see these interactions, you start to ask yourself, well, why is it happening there and not there? And what's causing this? And it can be very confusing when you start to break it down. But here you can see, for example, that the dark areas are coming to the foreground, and starting within a certain level of gray, it looks like right there where it turns towards a middle gray to a darker gray and then black. These are the areas that are bleeding through from the value layer below. Whereas the lighter values, in other words, I'm going to turn this off for a second, the top one, the lighter values in here are being replaced by the color information, so they're not allowed to bleed through. All right, so here on the wall, the rock wall behind my face, again, we kind of see where the darker grays are bleeding through and the lighter areas are not. Here's a very light section where the sun is hitting the rock, and that's being replaced by my face. Okay, whereas the darker shadow areas are coming through. So you're starting to see the difference in how these interact with each other. And I'm not going to go through and analyze every single one, but just go through yourself and take a look at the results, and you can see what I'm talking about. And as an artist, you'll want to go through and try these from time to time, but the main thing is to have a sense of what each category does so that you know where you're going with it. And then you can try each one and see where it takes you and see what you think is most applicable. But in most situations, I find that when I'm using darkening, for the most part, I'm using multiply. Occasionally darken maybe on certain cases, but you never know. So it's fun to sort of try some of these others like color burn and linear burn that are a little bit more extreme, a little bit more abstract, but you may find uses for them. Okay, well, the lighten category, as you can imagine, does the opposite of darken, and its most popular pick is usually screen. Okay, and screen is like taking two negatives and projecting them together at the same time, and you get a very blown out whitish effect here. You can see the white parts of the gradient are now coming through on my forehead, and the dark areas are being left more intact, and it's sort of bleaching out all the lighter areas now. Lighten again. Now you can see we're having the opposite effect on my face. The parts that were being hidden before are now being revealed, and you can see now if I compare that with darken, it's pretty much the exact opposite of lighten in terms of what's coming through on my face and what's being revealed and what's being hidden. All right, now the others again are more extreme versions, and they can give you some pretty interesting looks, but at any rate, I'll let you explore these on your own for other photographs. Overlay is the one I use the most, probably of all the blend modes. I use this for dodging and burning, to set up dodge and burn layers, and I'll talk about overlay on other tutorials, and you'll see me give you examples of how to do that. But basically what it does is it neutralizes the grays and basically treats that as neutral. You can see the gray bar here, middle gray is not having any effect there on my portrait. And it darkens and lightens what goes below middle gray or above middle gray. So in other words, if a better way to demonstrate this, I think, is to show you a gradient. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to turn these off for a moment, and I'm going to make a new layer here. And you don't have to do this on your own, but you can if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and just take the gradient tool. Well, let me just define an area here. Just make a small gradient and make a small black to white gradient in there. There we go. That'll work. And deselect. Okay. I'm going to take the move tool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to an overlay blend mode. And make sure this is on regular normal. And I think we're all ready to go. Okay. So what I've got here, let me turn this off for a second. Just a black to white gradient with gray in the middle here and white in top. Now let's go to turn the color layer back on. So you can see what's happening here is that the dark parts of this gradient are truly darkening the photograph. Okay, there my eye is getting really dark. And then as I move to the middle gray area, it starts to get lighter and lighter. Now finally when I get to the light areas, it starts bleaching the image. So this is why it's great for what I call a dodge and burn layer. Dodging and burning is that process in photography where you lighten or darken the image. So if I want parts of my image to be a little bit lighter, I can take an overlay blend mode like this and simply paint lighter colors, or excuse me, lighter parts of the value scale, meaning light gray or white, and I can then brighten parts of the image with that. And if I take darker grays, then I can do the same thing with the shadows. I can go ahead and deepen the shadows and generate more intensity there in the shadow areas. And so I can really get more contrast in the image that I'm looking for, or I can start to bring out certain details that are missing perhaps in the photograph. And so it's a great way to take control of the value scale of your photograph. So anyway, that's what the overlay area is really all about. There are different variations of that, just like with all the others. There's soft light and hard light. And I'll just turn this back on and show you quickly what some of these do. But, whoops, this one should be on normal. And, okay. There's a more subtle version of what overlay does. It's a little bit more bleached out, washed out, I should say, a little bit softer. It's not as harsh as the results with overlay, but again, probably my second most popular choice in the category. But again, it's very useful for controlling the value scale in your photographs. Hard light, much more extreme version. But as you go through these, you can sort of experiment. Now here we have a real extreme contrast. Look at the bleaching there. But it's kind of fun to move something like this around a photograph and see what it does. It's almost like shining a light and casting a shadow on certain parts of your photograph as you move it around. It can really have a transformative quality on the way that you decide to go with your photograph and the way that you interact. So it's not a bad idea to build a gradient like this yourself and start moving it around and kind of see what variations you can get. And this is kind of the fun you can have with blend modes. But as you go through, just try different things and see. Whoa, hard mix. A little bit psychedelic there. All right, get the idea. Okay, difference and exclusion. Here you have, again, you can make your portrait look like a negative, and you can kind of really get some far out results there. Just kind of a softer version of that, almost like the soft light equivalent to difference. What soft light is to overlay is almost like what exclusion is to difference, but just a softer version of it. Let's move on to the final category here under hue. What's going on here is that the top layer that's being assigned to hue is replacing the hue levels, the hue information of the photograph with what's there on top, whereas the value information is not being replaced. So the shadow areas here in my hair and the highlights are being left alone, but the color is being removed because the hue is being replaced. Okay, so remember, hue is the color itself. As I drag this around, you can see what it's doing. So again, a very, very useful blend mode. Saturation, has to do with just replacing the saturation of the bottom layer with the saturation of the top layer. So as you can see, this layer is completely desaturated because it has no color, and so it's able to take out the saturation level completely of the color. Next one, color. It's able to replace the color with what's below it, but a better example of that would be to show you a color strip. So I've got one right here, and so should you in your file. I'm going to turn this on and change it to color blend mode. And you can see there with the red, that's now replacing the red color information with what's below it. Now if I turn on the black and white value and do that, and you can see there we go. There's that color strip going through the photograph there. Okay. All right, well, hopefully this has been a good overview for you to give you some insight into what these blend modes can do for you. Again, just to sum things up, what I recommend you do is that you understand the basic categories and how they work, and then you apply them on a case-by-case basis to see what's right for you. And don't forget, you can always interact with your opacity levels and your blend modes together. Just because you're using a blend mode doesn't mean, for example, that you can't also take advantage of your opacity slider. If something is too extreme and you want to bring it down a bit, go ahead and just mix and match with that opacity level to get exactly what you want. And you can even take things further again by adding a layer mask as well. That's something you can do. Just because you're using blend modes doesn't mean your other aspects of your layers are not going to work anymore. Hopefully this has been informative. There's nothing to turn in from this assignment. Once again, it's just a quick demo to give you some information on blend modes. And we'll be using these in the future. We'll see you on the next one.